It's 4:20 somewhere, and right now that somewhere is right here. So hello and welcome to the Cannabis Show. My name is producer Vince, and here's your host, Ricardo Baca.
Vince, thank you for that, dude, and to everybody joining us today. Welcome back to the Cannabis Show.
Back to the
Cannabis Show. We're sorry about that little lull, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Here at the Cannabis Show, we talk about all things weed.
Hashtag all things weed.
And that is the serious marijuana news and the fun stuff as well. In fact, if you pop on to the site right now, that's thecannabist.co. You can read stories about the U.S. Supreme Court not weighing in on Montana's medical marijuana mess.
And what that means for us.
About a hot new batch of cannabis-infused products that might just surprise you.
Especially where they go.
And about a rabbi and a pastor in Maryland who have applied to grow medical weed.
So a rabbi and a pastor walk into a bar and grow weed.
Something like that, Vince. Vince, how have you been? Where have you been? How are you doing?
You know, I'm doing great. I've been healing up from a little bit of an injury that I get on assignment. If you follow me on Twitter or Instagram, you're already well too familiar with it. But I've been great. I fulfilled a childhood dream yesterday, and I hung out with Sublime with Rome at their show out at Red Rocks. There's an interview and some video and a little bit of a sneak peek into their sound check, believe it or not. They let me shoot video at a sound check that y'all get to see next week, hopefully, when I finally finish putting it together. How the hell you been, Ricardo?
That's cool, dude. It's good to have you back. Letting our loyal listeners and viewers know. Yeah, sorry about those 2 weeks. Vince's injury completely screwed up our ability to produce the show and push it out to you, but you're going to get those shows. We recorded them with the help of our other producers. We're going to get them to you, including next week. You're going to see some of that Sublime with Rome action, interviews, sound check, behind the scenes at the world famous Red Rocks Amphitheater.
My first show at Red Rocks Amphitheater, man, and I lived up to the hype. That place, religious experience out there, it was awesome.
Truth be told, well, Vince, you know this. I used to be a music critic for this very paper for 12 years, and I took that job very seriously. Had a lot of fun, but I also, you know, couldn't help but pay attention to so many people coming to Colorado and falling in love with Red Rocks. I grew up here. I've been going to Red Rocks since I was a kid. And truth be told, it is a very special room. It is the best amphitheater in the world. I mean, I know you Pacific Northwest listeners are talking about the Gorge, and yes, that's spectacular too. I've been up to Sasquatch a couple times, but you know, nothing compares to sitting between those rocks, right, Vince?
Absolutely. And you're listening to music that you love. I was listening to music I grew up singing along to, and I'm still staring up and to the left and up to the right, and the band was by no means the coolest thing in that room. It was rad, dude.
There's a reason. There's a reason. I highly encourage, if you've never been to Red Rocks, you got to come out to Colorado and go see a show. It's seriously like 15, 20 minutes from downtown Denver. But Vince, let's jump into this, man. Are you ready for the weekend weed?
You know, I did a lot of reading on my time off, and for the first time ever, I actually feel prepared for a weekend weed. Let's do it, brother.
Awesome. Okay, we are starting this weekend weed in the Washington, D.C. area, where the Drug Enforcement Administration and other federal government agencies are considering rescheduling marijuana.
Of course, cannabis is currently a Schedule I substance, sitting alongside heroin as one of the most dangerous drugs known to man. But now that science and government agencies and the general public know that pot is safer and less addictive than many non-controlled substances, this rescheduling or descheduling conversation is finally moving forward.
Well, descheduling might be getting ahead of yourself or ourselves, but you know, we at the Cannabist wanted to have a look at the good, the bad, and the ugly of rescheduling marijuana. Because if it's rescheduling, you know, we're talking about Schedule 2 or 3. Vince mentioned descheduling. That's taking it off the controlled list entirely. That's probably not going to happen, according to most experts who are thinking and looking at what the DEA has done in the past and what they're going to do in the future. But if we're moving it to Schedule 2 or 3, that kind of a move would have many positives for the science and research of cannabis and for the weed industry as well. It could also have some very real negatives, though. So Vince, please help me in counting off some of those positives of rescheduling, and then we'll talk about some of the negatives afterward.
I'm not surprised you gave me the long list to read, but I'll start with research, since that's a really big one, dude. Right now, it's incredibly hard for anybody to do research on cannabis. In fact, any government sanction has to come from one single garden that it's provided to them by. It's hard for universities to get a hold of it. It's hard for government agencies to be able to do research on it. And so it's hard for us to be able to give concrete data behind so many of the anecdotal things that are being thrown in courtrooms right now. So it'll, help us revitalize the conversation across the country right now.
And that's a big one. So what we're talking about is if DEA chooses to reschedule cannabis, and that's still an if. This is not a sure thing. Moving it from Schedule 1 would open up research. Definitely make it easier. Some other positives would involve doctors being able to write prescriptions and not just recommendations for marijuana, and also the possibility of a massive open interstate market. Which, when you compare it to what we have now, we have this individual market in each state. Sure, there are corporations that are operating in different states. We've had the Open Vape guys here before. We've had the Live Well guys here just last week. That's an episode you'll see next week. We've talked to these people about how they operate in other states, and it's not like it's one corporate infrastructure. They have to license their creative property and their procedures to other businesses to conduct business in other states because they can't. So one possible part of this rescheduling conversation could be a Colorado marijuana company could also be operating in New Mexico or in Washington.
That'd be pretty rad. And there are lots of other potential positives for rescheduling marijuana, including getting rid of some of the mammoth, and I mean mammoth, federal taxes paid by legal cannabis businesses, the government's acknowledging of marijuana as a legitimate medicine, and the protection of federal employees and newspapers, that's right, newspapers, that deal with very outdated laws and executive orders.
But what about the negatives of rescheduling pot? There are a couple possibilities, and of course, again, these are just possibilities. We don't know what's going to happen. But one of the most severe possibilities would literally shutter thousands of legal marijuana businesses, some people fear. The idea is that rescheduling weed will dramatically change the regulatory environment surrounding this substance, adding costly and very timely FDA approval steps to the pot selling process that could bankrupt many of these relatively small businesses.
And because we've never rescheduled marijuana at the federal level before, we don't really know what would happen if the DEA makes this big step. But the hypotheses are among the most prominent forecasts out there, and you can see these possibilities and a lot more over at thecannabist.co.
All right, now elsewhere in the Week in Weed, we are catching you up on the productive conversations now happening between physicians and researchers and the National Football League Players Association. And Vince, what are they talking about?
They're talking about CBD, or cannabidiol, one of the non-psychoactive components of marijuana that has proven medical properties. And some doctors and health officials think CBD could help NFL players and ex-players as they deal with aches and pains and they take a beating. They want to deal with them without powerful and addictive opioids.
Now the doctors and the Players Association are only talking right now, but if you've been following this conversation, as our very own Nikki Jabvala has, she's a sports writer for The Post, been doing tremendous coverage on this subject.
She was on the show with us a couple weeks ago talking about it.
She was on the show a couple months ago. You know that these talks between the doctors and researchers and the NFL Players Association are a very big deal. The NFL has not been open to the idea of marijuana as medicine. That's been very well documented. One of our reporters asked the commissioner, I think his name is Roger Goodell, asked him about that at the Super Bowl this year when the Broncos absolutely annihilated,
wasted the Panthers. Let's talk about that again.
But this is something that the NFL has not been open to, and now that even that a conversation is happening, this is big news alone, and that's why I wanted to touch base on it in this Week in Weed.
Yeah, $1 billion industry and another $1 billion industry finally coming to the table and having a chat. It makes sense. And yet now you have a professor of psychology at the University of Pennsylvania's Perelman School of Medicine saying that the NFL's Players Association is, quote, in the process of circling back around to us to continue the conversation about whether they can help us out, end quote.
You know, this effort is part of the When the Bright Lights Fade campaign, which was started in Colorado by the folks behind perhaps the best known high CBD strain, and that's Charlotte's Web.
Of course.
Which has helped some children and adults with conditions ranging from epileptic seizures to severe pain.
And some of the momentum behind this campaign was brought on by the first 2 active NFL players to ever speak out in favor of medical cannabis research, including former Baltimore Raven Eugene Monroe and the Tennessee Titans' Derek Morgan.
Indeed, Vince. It's good to have you back, man.
It's great to be back,
it is
brother.
time to bring out our first guest, and he runs a market-leading vaporizer company called Puffco. And he's visiting Colorado to speak with us and some others. It's my pleasure to welcome out Roger Volodarsky to the Cannabist Show. Hey, man.
Good seeing you, Rick.
Good seeing you, too. Oh, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Did I get your last name right, Volodarsky?
Yes, actually, you said perfectly.
Oh, good.
Shocking.
Okay.
Doesn't happen very often.
I usually try and ask beforehand, but I forgot.
No, it's okay. You nailed
Welcome to Denver.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
What else are you doing while you're out here?
Just a bit of PR. We have this new device and requires a bit of education, lots of new features in it, so we're here to just let a few people know how it works.
And we are going to talk about that new device
Awesome.
that's over here. But first, Roger, we ask everybody on the couch the same question, and that is, where's your head at these days? Are you more of an indica guy or sativa?
I would say lately I'm probably more of an indica guy, and I'm actually, you know, New York is a sour diesel city.
Sure.
So we're really heavy in the sativas, but lately, I guess with all the work, I find myself needing to be slowed down more than sped up. So I've been leaning more towards indicas.
Oh, nice. Okay. I'm curious, though, because, you know, we watch High Maintenance. I've bought weed from the bike
Totally.
messengers in Brooklyn.
Totally.
And do you feel like now you actually have an idea what you're buying when you're buying it? Like when the bike messenger says, yeah, this is Sour D. Do you think it is?
I don't.
I was going to say.
I would say whatever a New York bike messenger is telling you is probably pure marketing.
Yeah.
But I do trust what a lot of, you know, the better and more reputable dispensaries tell me. And if you know the genetics of the strain and you're a fan of cannabis, you actually can get a pretty good idea of what's in there and how it's going to make you feel. And yeah, so I usually try to find out more about what the plant was before it was named. And that's kind of how I judge what it's going to do for me.
I wonder, is it more apt to ask these delivery folk if it's a sativa or indica? I mean, are you more likely to get an accurate answer there rather than a strain specific?
Because it's still a black market there, I think information doesn't make its way to the actual salespeople or bike messengers or whatever you would call them. And so, yeah, I think whatever they're getting and they're told they're getting from their guys, however that supply chain works, you know, you're getting that marketing, whatever it was sold to them as. But here, you actually have real information. You have testing. You have a lot of stuff that goes into showing you what you're buying. And so I do try to always stick to buying stuff where I know where it came from.
Right.
And then there's the other side of it having pesticides and being safe. And so considering how much cannabis I consume in our R&D, I try to make sure it's coming from a place where I know how it got there.
We've talked about R&D in the marijuana space before on the show, and that's a fun topic, especially when you're making things like vape pens. So Roger, let's talk about this.
Sure.
This is your latest product. You're calling it the Puffco Plus, and it is a vape pen. And you know, we at the Cannabist hear from vape companies daily about their new groundbreaking, ground-shaking products, and you know, let's be honest, most of these aren't. So, what is it about the Puffco Plus that is actually a game changer?
So there's the Puffco Plus is the first all-inclusive system in a vape pen. So a lot of vape pens usually just have a coil, a variation of a coil. So some will be wrapped around a ceramic rod, some a quartz rod, some a fiber wick. And the way ours is different is, one, it's coilless. It's actually just a bucket that has no wires in the chamber, even, you know, leading out of the heating element or anything. And it also has a loading tool. If I'm just going to do a quick demo since you have this out.
Sure.
So I don't know if it's possible to zoom in here or not, but and it probably is difficult, but there's a little loading tool tool here and a little oil trap above that. So you can actually use the mouthpiece to pick up your oil, load it in here, and it'll sit perfectly a millimeter above the bottom of the plate. And the other thing that makes it different is it's the first vaporizer ever with a sesh mode. So if you, let me unlock it here, it's 5 clicks. If you click it twice, it stays on for 12 seconds. So the reason we did this was, if I'm sure you especially, you'll meet somebody where they don't know how to use a vape pen, and often if you hand it to them, they'll just start inhaling or fiddle around with it. So we made it so you can click it twice, give it to somebody and just say, just inhale. But what I found is that I actually use sesh mode for myself more because it's that perfect 12-second large medicating hit. And so all those things together, being able to load, not having to deal with a coil, having a true portable nail almost that you would have in your rig, is what really sets it apart.
And that's interesting. I like the idea of a sesh mode because you're right. It's like if you just want to hit or a couple sips, then you're hitting it 5 times to turn it on, and you're hitting it, or you're sipping it, and then you're hitting it 5 times to turn it off. That's kind of a nice feature if it automatically turns off.
Yeah, and it's really an accidental way to give yourself what I believe is the perfect dose. Everybody's different, but yeah, it's totally cool for that reason.
Well, you know, I'm not the vape pen expert at the Cannabist. I hired somebody to do that, and our critic, Ben Livingston, interviewed you a couple months ago when he was reviewing the Puffco Plus, and you know, Ben's tough. He is incredibly tough on other vaporizers. I would highly recommend you guys go check out his reviews. Go to the cannabis.co reviews. I think it's gear or vapes. You know, he doesn't accept the company line. He wanted to talk to you, the founder of this company, to really get to the bottom of this, and he liked it a lot. One of the things he really liked about the Puffco Plus, and he talked about it, how it moved the game forward, is its lack of a visible coil. And I kind of get that, but as I'm not so much in the oil space in my own vaporization, I'd love for you to explain this. Why is that, you know, make a difference in a vape pen, not having that visible coil out there and just instead having this ceramic chamber that's heated from the outside?
Sure. So the reason it was so important to me, the main reason, is actually oil integrity. So when you put your oil into a vaporizer, many of the coil ones, you'll notice that if you fire it once, now the rest of your hits taste like that initially burnt oil, like Reclaim or whatever have you. And what the non-exposed chamber does, which we're the only one currently making this in a vape pen, is that none of your oil touches any coils or lead wires. So when you have those donut-style heating elements or just a flat plate, they all have to be powered, and that power is happening when the lead wires come out of the bottom and into the battery. In ours, that is happening outside of the chamber. So there's no metals whatsoever touching your oil, and you just have heat working with the oil to give you flavor and a medicated hit. And it's honestly my favorite feature of the device, because all I care about is how long I can use my oil, how long the flavor will last, that it works for me, and that I'm not wasting some really expensive product on a vape pen. And that is my favorite feature. Others will say sesh mode, others love the loading tool, but oil integrity is everything for me, and that's what we worked really hard for, and have patent pending.
Nice.
For everybody out there watching, getting ideas.
Well, you mentioned something that I think is particularly interesting about this space, and that's the flavor. So many of the oil heads I know, and people who only dab or only vaporize with oils, do so because of that flavor. And you know, you're ultimately, if it was extracted correctly, you know, you're ultimately vaporizing a very pure form of THC and different cannabinoids, right? So, how much of that comes into play for you when you're getting high? I mean, is it part of wanting to taste the true flavor of that supposed sour D you bought off a Bike Messenger, or the legit Blue Dream you're buying on a legal market? It's
a combination of everything. I love the results of dabbing. I don't necessarily love the process. It seems very archaic. But I love the terpenes that you get in certain hash. I mean, some of them are going up to like 11%, which is a flavor explosion. You have all the cannabinoids you want with no plant material. And I think when you're smoking concentrates, you're getting the most from the plant without having to work very hard from it. I think it's why they're growing in popularity over regular cannabis consumption. So yeah, I think all of the hash heads I know, it's important to them because they only want the best from the plant, and they don't want to compromise at all. And it really is the true connoisseur.
I dig it. Well, Puffco makes pens that people can load with their own oils, their own loose leaf, not this one particularly, but you have another one. And that's an interesting segment of the game. I think a lot of people call it non-plant touching or whatever it is, because you're not touching the plant, you're just selling the device.
Yeah, exactly.
Other companies, of course, sell preloaded vape pens, cartridges, and with that THC oil alone, as you know, oftentimes that can't be vaporized or atomized alone, and so they're adding it into mixing agents such as like polyethylene glycol, coconut oil, and then vaporizing it from there. And we've talked a lot about this a lot on the show. It's a subject I'm personally very interested in and passionate about. What's your take on these cartridge-based pens, but also some of the chemicals that they're utilizing as mixing agents?
So I'm not the biggest fan of them. I love cannabis, and I don't, like the answer to my last question, there's the true connoisseur. He wants the best of the plant and nothing else. And when you take that and you're diluting it with something not derived from the plant, it's definitely a compromise. The pre-filled chambers themselves are not really getting hot enough to give you a thick medicating hit. I've never really gotten what I needed from one of the pens, even in the jam. And then also, I don't want to say anything I don't know for a fact, but I've read some not great reports on, PG 400 and other stuff they used to dilute it. And I think the future is going to be diluting it with cannabis-derived terpenes, sticking to the plant. It works. It's expensive, but it's a great, safe solution that we know where it's coming from. It's exactly what we'd be using in there. And so for now, I will stick to load my own because I care about where my cannabis comes from. And hopefully in the future, we can help, through hardware and stuff, build a market where pre-fills don't need to be diluted with non-cannabis derived stuff to make them work.
And I'm glad you brought up terpenes, because there's a local maker in the market that does have a pre-filled cartridge that they say is only THC oil mixed with terpenes, and that's it.
They're great. I still think that the hardware needs to see an improvement, but those
desperately.
Yeah.
God, how many worthless batteries do we have kicking around our junk drawers?
And burned out cartridges,
Absolutely.
And when you try to get that flavorful hit with those awesome cannabis-derived terpenes, and you get that dry, fiber wick, coily taste, the advancement of product has gone much further than the advancement of hardware in pre-fills.
Sure.
And so it's a market we're looking at very carefully, and we have some ideas about, but hopefully next year we'll be talking about that here.
I hope so. Roger, pleasure meeting you. Thanks for
Great
coming up.
too.
We're going to talk with you some more here very shortly.
Great. Thanks so much.
All right. I do want to right now kick to our very own Wizard of Weed. Of course, that's Professor Pat for this week's entry in the new Cannabist lexicon.
Haze, one of the pillars of modern cannabis. The original Haze line is thought to have come from Central California by a pair of brothers who became known as the Haze Brothers. Haze is a tall, rangy plant that most often takes 12 or more weeks to flower, which is difficult in most indoor grow rooms as well as with most outdoor growing seasons. This prompted breeders to introduce the shorter flowering indica genetics into the mix, such as Northern Lights and Skunk No. 1, creating some of cannabis's most award-winning and noteworthy varieties. Haze is prized for its almost electric, creative buzz, which makes it a favorite of sativa smokers everywhere. To hear that in a sentence, you pretty much can't find original Haze anywhere. But if you search hard enough through packs of Super Silver Haze, you might find a few crazies.
Thank you for that, Professor Pat. Always good times with you, man. Our next guest is also making his first appearance on the show. He's best known for making edibles, and he'll soon release his cookbook of pot-infused treats to the masses. But he's also a self-proclaimed Santa Claus imposter, so let's bring this guy out. Michael Rubens to the Cannabist Show. Hey, Michael, how you doing, man?
Good. How about you?
Good. Thanks for coming up.
And by the way, I tell people that I'm Santa's evil twin.
Oh, yeah?
And I've been banished from the North Pole because I suggested a threesome with Mrs. Claus, but not with my twin brother, with one of the elves. Those are nasty little guys.
Well, all right.
I love it, man. That is perfect. That's a fantastic story. Okay. How often do you tell that part of the story?
You know, I just made it up a few days ago on Mass Roots. Somebody made another Santa comment. Yeah, why not?
I saw it on your Twitter bio. I was like, I'm pulling that out. All right, Santa/Michael. Indica or sativa?
I try not to get too hung up with that. Generally, I prefer sativas. What people describe as being racy, I just love. White Slipper is one of my favorites to smoke and actually write and wake up the next morning and read what I've written and it makes sense.
Oh, nice. That's a luxury when you're actually writing or creating while stoned, because that doesn't always make sense.
No, and I used to try to do that as a teenager, and I'd wake up and look at the paper and go, what the hell was I talking about? I also am a huge fan of a strain that originated from Barney's in Amsterdam called LSD. It's listed as an indica, but it has a very sativa effect on me.
Oh, okay.
I don't think weed makes creativity happen. I think it knocks down walls that things that are already in our mind that we just from our daily lives, everything gets blocked up, and that LSD strain that releases everything.
Oh, nice. Yeah. I mean, there's that general way of thinking that we only use a certain very small percentage of our brains on a daily basis, right? So if there is a substance out there that can knock down some of those walls, then all about it. All right, cool. Well, Michael, I was thumbing through your book earlier, and it made me laugh because it's almost like you were predestined for this career making cannabis-infused edibles. Please tell us all about your first concert experience that you document in the book.
Yeah. I grew up from age 10 until I finished high school right outside Vancouver, BC. And when I was 13, I don't know how or why my parents let me go, but my first show was Cheech and Chong at a all-wooden fire trap called The Garden in Vancouver, about a 3,500 seat venue. And I didn't even smoke weed yet. Sat down, it was all festival seating. And a second after I sat down on the floor, about 50 feet from the stage, this guy that looks like I do now sat down beside me, took out his keys, popped open a tin can of loose tobacco. It wasn't filled with tobacco. About at least 100 joints, and he started just passing them around to everyone around us. And he offered me one, and of course, I refused because I was a good kid.
You were 13 years old, sure, yeah.
I'm sure I got a contact eye at the show. But no, seeing Cheech and Chong in their heyday, Chong getting down on all fours, taking an imaginary dump on the stage, and Cheech coming by and just commenting of the artistry and beauty of the turds was hilarious.
And did you know what you were getting into? Were you familiar with their comedy before that?
Yeah, my brother and I used to listen to their records.
Okay, sure.
But 3 months later, I was sitting in the field next to my junior high with 3 of my basketball teammates, passing a joint around for my first time.
First time? Oh, fascinating. That was a big year for you.
Oh, yeah.
Cheech and Chong and then your first stone. Okay, Michael, well, this is something that I'm particularly interested in. I don't know that you know this about me, but I don't smoke weed. I only eat edibles and occasionally vaporize. So this gets my attention when you tell me that you don't use canna butter, you don't use canna oil when you're making your edibles. You use what you call pot flour. Tell me how you came up with this. Is it your creation? Did you read about it on the internet and adopt it? And then also, why do you use pot flour, instead of these other more tested, more adopted methods?
Well, I would love to take credit for the origination of pot flour.
Sure.
I'm sure someone else tried it before I did. When I was baking commercially for Colorado Cannabis Company, I made huge vats of infused butter. And one of the side effects of making canna butter is it stinks.
Yeah,
it
very true.
really smells.
It's nasty.
Even though it's legal, I don't. When I'm baking at home, I don't need the whole neighborhood and the next neighborhood over to know what I'm up to.
People were knocking on my door in my apartment building when I was making canna butter last week.
You texted me about that, Vince. Yeah,
I did. It smells good. I can't wait to try it still.
Well, when you make pot flour, you still have to decarboxylate the cannabis to alter it chemically to be active.
So you decarboxylate it first.
Right. And then I put it literally at home. I put it, I have 2 dedicated $20 coffee grinders, and I grind the shit out of it till it ends up the particle size of regular flour. And what it enables you to do is any recipe that calls for regular flour, you can take X amount of the regular flour out and substitute the pot flour. When you're decarboxylating and you're baking the product, yeah, there's a smell.
Sure.
But nothing like making a big vat of canna butter.
So is that the primary reason that you make the pot flour instead of a canna butter? For the, not letting the whole neighborhood know? Or do you actually prefer it for the end result as well?
I think, and I have no scientific proof of this, because we can't do these.
There's not a lot of science in this space right now, we understand.
I swear that the feedback I've had from people is that there's less loss of the peripheral cannabinoids, because I think, 62 cannabinoids have been discovered so far.
Yeah, it's in the 50s or 60s.
And I've had people come back to me and tell me they saw God on my edibles. Now, I'm not going to say that.
Well,
that's
eat enough of any edible.
Sure. This is true. And by the way, I get a lot of massages, and it finally hit me. I ate an edible half an hour before a massage. So by the time she was working on me, I thought that I had relaxed before at a massage.
Yeah.
She got into places that it was, and she worked on me for 2 hours. That was the other great
nice.
thing.
Okay.
But I was transported to another universe. It was really great. I can't suggest that enough.
Well, Michael, from those of us who have already done that, welcome to the club, because
I'll
that is a
too,
very,
man. That's the dream.
Yeah, me and Vince talk about that stuff all the time. So, Michael, I do want to hear about the book, and I hope you brought a copy of it.
Did.
Baking to Get Baked. Tell us the story of this book and where you've been with it and where you're going with it.
Well, I published it as an ebook on Amazon about 2 months ago. I was named Denver's Best Edibles in 2015 by Westward, Best In-House Edibles, when I was baking for Colorado Cannabis Company.
Sure.
So it's kind of several angles of this. I started growing up my beard about 3 years ago with the express idea that I was going to create a brand that at some point, with my experience and the look and the logo, I could offer a turnkey operation to a cannabis company that just had a grow and a dispensary and wanted to get into the edible business, so they could, license the logo, and I could train people how to make my kind of edibles. I love the taste of slightly burnt butter, brown sugar, and cannabis. When you balance that right, it is phenomenal.
And it seems like you've done a lot of R&D in this space.
Yes, I have. My very first, and this story is also in the book, my first edible experience was in Amsterdam. And in 1980, I just turned 21.
Space cakes?
You got it.
Oh, yeah.
They
We've all been there.
So innocent. So innocent looking that I ate 2 slices.
Oh, my.
I was high for 16 hours.
Yeah.
Had a great time, but could not believe that I woke up the next day still high.
Yeah, sure.
Just had a great experience.
Go down to the canals, have a walk, rent a bike. Sure.
We actually went to the Milky Way and watched, they were showing Duck Soup, the old Marx Brothers movie at midnight.
Oh, yeah.
And about halfway through, I looked over at my buddy to ask him if he was high yet. And when I looked, his eyes weren't there. He had completely slouched, and he was staring straight up at the ceiling. It was wild.
Michael, you're predestined for this world. I do want to. I know you have one of these recipes on your website. Tell our viewers, readers, listeners what the recipe is, where they can find it, and you know, if they like it, maybe they can go buy your book.
Sure. First of all, the name of the book is Baking to Get Baked. And you can go to bakingtogetbaked.com, or my character I created, mjodingreen.com. And right now we're doing free shipping. You can get the book and a t-shirt together for $19.99. And
What
by
a
the
deal.
way, here is your t-shirt before I forget.
Oh yeah, thanks. Yeah, I can be just like you. Got Michael on a t-shirt.
It's hilarious to walk into Chipotle or somewhere and the person helping me looks at my face, looks at the shirt, looks back up, back at the shirt. Finally, is that you? Yeah. Oh, I hear the Jerry Garcia, Willie Nelson, Santa.
Sure.
Yeah, all the time.
Bakingtogetbaked.com. And what are those? What are these things on the front?
These are actually known as Russian tea cakes, but it's my twist on them, obviously infused. But it was one of my favorite cookies growing up that my mom made.
Oh,
And
cool.
it's really just butter, flour, ground nuts, and weed, with a few other ingredients in there.
Pot flour.
Pot flour, of course.
Pot flour. So you can check out bakingtogetbaked.com. Try these Russian tea cakes out, and if you like them, maybe pay Michael's website a visit and buy the book and the t-shirt combo.
Thank you. And we like to refer to these as nutty dingle balls.
Oh, nutty dingle balls.
Just to
of
make
course.
people uncomfortable when they say it. I get a lot of
But then they
amusement
eat
out of
one,
it.
and it's the funniest thing they've ever heard.
Exactly.
Well, if I don't imagine you've seen it, but some filmmakers made a documentary about my colleagues and I here. It's called Rolling Papers, and at one point we found ourselves in Montevideo, Uruguay, researching, talking to different regulators and activists down there about their first of its kind federal legalization system. And one of the activists gave me a little jar of weed, which was very sweet. I don't smoke, and so we ended up going out to dinner that night, and it's still in my bag, and this is all in the film. But sure enough, these wonderful restaurateurs, they were partners, and Anna ran the kitchen and her partner ran the front of house. And we got to talking to them. We're sitting around drinking wine late after they've closed, and I brought it out and I was like, "What do you think?" And she's like, "I know how to make canna butter." And I was like, "Oh yeah?" And she's like, "You want to come back for dinner tomorrow and I'll have dessert for you guys?" And I was like, "Sure." And so sure enough, we went back to their awesome restaurant in downtown Montevideo. I think it was called Bechamel, and she made us some little dessert balls that looked oddly like those, but I think they were brown chocolates.
Well, there's a Hispanic version of these, Mexican wedding cookies.
Sure.
Is pretty similar.
Yeah,
Not
yeah.
exactly the same, but pretty close.
Oh yeah, I grew up with those. I want to bring Roger back into the conversation. You know, I want to talk about personal responsibility because, you know, in these early days of legalization, I think so much of this conversation goes to the children, and I think it has to an extent. You know, obviously, you have to want to protect that element of society. You know, that they're innocent and hopefully they shouldn't be unnecessarily exposed to this. At the same time, you know, right now our state legislatures working on making marijuana infused edibles recognizable inside of package, but also immediately recognizable outside of package. So is this a conversation about children and accidental ingestion, or is this a conversation about a personal responsibility of adults, you know, the parents and guardians of these children who are perhaps leaving their infused edibles out on the table where their children can get to them, where their, you know, toddlers can get to them? Roger, let's start with you. Where do you think this conversation is, and where do you think we're headed?
Interesting one. I mean, it's definitely the responsibility falls on the parents, but I think as kids, we always wanted like the candy or the hidden treat that mom and dad wouldn't leave out. And so it's this weird thing here. There is a responsibility, but there's also kids like us that like want a treat and would go into like the top cabinet and get something. So it is a very interesting topic that I think requires a lot of attention that I don't give edibles. I enjoy edibles occasionally. They are a much larger commitment to me than dabbing is. But yeah, I think definite responsibility on the parents and maybe some unique solutions like having a lock box or something. It seems really, really extra because guess, well, maybe you do. You have to do that, I guess, for a liquor cabinet. There are plenty of people who lock their liquor cabinet up for their kids, so...
It's the first lock kids usually learn how to pick.
You know, you're right, because thinking back to my own childhood, I know where my mom used to hide the Christmas presents.
Yeah.
I know where she used to hide, you know, she didn't really have to hide the booze because I wasn't all that interested in, but yeah, I know where she used to hide certain things that I wasn't supposed to have access to, and if I really wanted to have access to it, I could have gotten to them.
Yeah.
I was a relatively good kid, but you're right, we're getting into this age where our stashes are now locked, and now it's a whole sub-industry in cannabis where you have, you know, we had the Stash Logics guys on the show last year, and different people are making these stash boxes that lock, that are secure. Michael, where are you at on this conversation? Is it about the kids or is it about the adults?
It's about both, but I think more so the adults. I talk about this in the book. When I was a bud tender, I felt it was my responsibility to transmit, you know, all the information I could about edibles. It's the most potent way to use cannabis by a long shot. The high is 3 times as long.
Sure.
And it's something that really hacks me off. You can't legislate responsibility. And having worked in the industry as long as I have, there's so many labels on the edible already. The bottom line is it's only being sold to people 21 and older. I guarantee that someone who's made a $500,000 to $1 million investment into a grow and a dispensary is not selling Incredibles out the back door. Right. That's not how these kids are getting it. They're getting it from adults who are buying it legally. Pharmaceutical drugs should be locked up. It's the biggest addiction drug problem in the country as far as
Opioids.
Kids stealing their parents' Vicodin or Oxy. That needs to be locked up. The weed needs to be locked up. The alcohol and guns. All those things can do harm to, well, everybody, but especially children. And it's up to adults to be responsible. I was living with friends in Parker when their son turned 12, 13. I just took myself down to Lowe's and bought myself a big waterproof toolkit.
Sure.
And put all my cannabis stuff in there. I still have it.
Yeah.
The fact that it's waterproof seals the smell. It's just what you should do, just being a responsible adult.
I think it's a very necessary part of the educational component of this conversation. And you're right, especially if you have children or if you regularly have children in your house and you have, you know, especially edibles, you just have to be responsible about that. And there's no, you know, there's no two ways about it. Interesting stuff. Gentlemen, it's time for the pot quiz. This is where I quiz you both on current events of cannabis. So how we work this, we're going to start with Roger. Roger, if you get the question wrong, Michael, you can try to steal the point.
Okay.
And don't worry, producer Vince is over there counting points vigilantly, and we'll see who wins this quiz for bragging rights.
Okay.
And this beautiful Cannabis Show mug that both of you guys are taking home regardless. So.
Oh, man. Maybe you could sign his. It'll be more valuable.
Yeah, right. All right, Roger, we're starting with you.
Sure.
New data from the United States Sentencing Commission shows that federal marijuana trafficking offenses have done what between 2012 and the present? A, they've fallen sharply. B, they've stayed the same. C, they've risen dramatically.
Between 2012 and now?
Yes.
Wow. That's a great question. Oh, man, I have a reason for either or. I'm gonna go with gone up.
You think they've risen dramatically?
Yeah.
Okay. That is the wrong answer.
Sure.
So we're kicking back to Michael. You can steal the point. Have these federal marijuana trafficking offenses risen sharply or stayed the same? No, I'm sorry. Fallen sharply or stayed the same?
I knew where you were going with that. They've fallen.
They have fallen. Yeah, so check out the Cannabist right now. It's on the homepage, and I actually just came across this data the other day working on this other piece about orange is the new black, but it turns out that our colleague Christopher Ingraham over at the Washington Post wrote it up, and really interesting data. And of course 2012 is the year that Colorado and Washington voted to legalize recreational cannabis sales, and the year that both of those laws technically took effect, even though the sales didn't start for another year plus. But good one. Good one. Well done, Michael. Michael, this question is for you. An attorney who was appointed last year to lead what state's medical marijuana program has resigned to pursue work in the private sector and possibly the medical marijuana industry itself? So what state is this former regulator from?
Well, I'm going to take a wild guess and say that this is a trick question and say Colorado.
Well, yeah, I like your spirit, but no, it's not Colorado.
That's why I lost the last question.
Yeah.
That's how I got the last question.
Right.
So Roger for the steal. So he's an attorney. He was appointed last year to lead what state's medical marijuana program, and he just resigned to pursue work in the medical cannabis space.
Curveball, Ohio?
Good guess. Good guess. But they just legalized medical 2-3 weeks ago, so I don't think they've appointed anybody for this quite yet. But it is Illinois.
Illinois.
I never would have guessed.
Yeah, no,
Well,
it's
I'm
tough.
happy they go to California or Washington. Yeah. One is closer to there.
I know. We one of our colleagues at the Orange County Register wrote a great profile on the woman who was selected to run the medical the general marijuana program in California, and she came up through the alcohol world, regulatory world.
It's gonna be really interesting.
Absolutely, that's a big posting. So, Roger, next question is coming to you. Is marijuana now Oregon's most valuable agricultural product over cattle, nursery plants, and hay? A, yes. B, no. C, still not sure.
Wow. Okay.
These are tough.
They are tough too, because you think about like the legal market in Oregon, and if it's the entire market, I would say 100% yes. I'm gonna go with yes.
Good point, because we're talking about the regulated market.
What the data that is available. So I'll still say yes.
All right. Yes. No. Not the right answer, but good guess.
That was misleading.
Michael, what do you think? So it's definitely not the most valuable agricultural product. So is it no or still not sure?
What were the other products?
Cattle, nursery plants,
seriously.
and hay. The previous number 1, 2, 3 in terms of agricultural products.
I'm going to say none. None of those.
So the question is marijuana Oregon's most valuable agricultural product? No, or they're still not sure?
No.
No. Oh man, you guys both got this one wrong.
They're not sure.
So they are not sure. When you think about where Oregon is with its regulatory environment, those legal sales, as you know, you were just out there, they just started the recreational sales, and so they're just figuring out what that market is going to look like. And then it's an interesting story. You can find it on the Cannabist. It's on the homepage, and it just talks about how they would have to, it's kind of apples and oranges in a way, because they would have to, the Department of Agriculture regulates cattle and the nursery plants, but then the cannabis is elsewhere. But soon, I think in the next year or two, we're going to see where marijuana ranks inside there, because I think cattle right now is about $1 billion industry outside of Oregon. So,
wow.
Michael, all right, last question of the quiz. Name the Colorado pot business that was recently denied a routine cultivation license renewal, and this was the first time the city of Denver had denied such a license renewal. These are very routine.
I just read this, and weed and memory.
It makes the pot quiz even more fun.
Yeah, right. Can we just play Find Your Foot? Was it? I just read this. It's not Live Well. It's.
All right, we need an answer.
I can't recall.
All right. Roger for the steal. You don't even live here,
Yeah.
but can you get this?
Just from New York, I would say the only recalls and stuff I've seen is for Edipure. That's what I've seen, like negative stuff in the news
Sure.
about. So I'm not. That's just a random guess.
Yeah, Edipure did go through a number of pesticide-related recalls. This was a marijuana shop, and they are a pretty big marijuana shop group. I think they have 7 or 8 stores called Starbuds. You can visit them while you're in Colorado.
Sure.
Check them out.
Should I, if they get their license?
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you, Rick.
joining me.
Thank you.
Michael, Roger, I want to say thank you, most importantly, to you guys. Thank you for listening to the podcast. Thank you for pushing that subscribe button. I'm Ricardo Baca, joined by producer Vince and Eric and the rest of the crew. Have a great day, everyone, and we will see you next week.
I'm allowed to lose, I choose to win, I'm all in, I'm calling any posse, you'll be raising at the end, I'll say it again, ain't afraid to get in, I'll be going for the jackpot with ace in my hand, I'm raw.